One quick battle, and Absalom's rebellion is over. God's man remains king. Why does David pick the forest for the battle? Why is Absalom captured alone? Was he hung in the tree by his hair or by his head? In today's lesson, we'll take a closer look at these questions. Today, we're going to be in 2 Samuel 18. So as we've gone through these last few chapters, Absalom has rebelled against David, and David left Jerusalem and went out to the Jordan Valley and stayed there for a while, probably only a few days, but for some short amount of time. And Absalom went into Jerusalem and took the city, and then decided that it was time for war against David. And it's taken a few weeks to get to this chapter when that battle actually is going to happen. And that's because I really wanted to highlight to everybody that played a role in David's protection, because he's had a lot of help from people. And one of my lessons was just dealing with what a dark place Israel had gotten to, but yet there was a number of lights of God that wanted to shine and help David. And even though the Bible says that all of Israel followed Absalom, and as we look at today's lesson as well in this chapter, it talks about the battle between David and Israel, just highlighting the fact that all of Israel really had gone after Absalom, wanted to follow him, except for these handful of people, the soldiers that went with David, and the woman that had the well, the sons of the high priest. And these three very wealthy men that we talked about last week that came down and provided aid to him. Virtually the whole kingdom had turned their back on David, but God's light always shines. There's always a few that are going to be faithful. And so it doesn't matter how dark the world gets, there's always going to be lighthouses for the Lord. So today we're going to look at the battle that's going to happen between David and Absalom. We're going to start reading in chapter 18, verse 1. It says, David numbered the people who served with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Then David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. The king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. And so David has been in many battles. He's a great general. He's a great king. He's a warrior. And there's a number of stories when, after he killed Goliath, he was given a company of men, and they would go out and they would raid the Philistines, and they would come back. Very swift battle. They would destroy the Philistines and come back, sometimes without losing a man. And there was times when he had 600 men with him, and they went from Ziklag down to chase the Amalekites, because Amalekites had stolen their families and their goods. And with these 600 men, he destroyed a nation. And there's many other battles that David leads. And so when we look at David, a lot of times we think people criticize David because he left Jerusalem and he was hesitant to fight his son. But when it was time for the battle, when he picked the place for the battle, this wasn't Absalom's decision. This is where David wanted the battle to be. And so when he was ready, he organized his army. And so he has 3 generals that he trusts. 2 are his cousins, Joab and Abishai. And then the third one is Ittai, who is a Philistine, who had followed him from Gath and been loyal to him for a long time. And as David and everybody was leaving Jerusalem, David told Ittai, why don't you go back home? This isn't your battle. And Ittai swore his allegiance to David. So he was a great general himself. And so David divides his soldiers into groups of thousands and groups of hundreds and puts captains or commanders over each group. And then he takes these 3 generals and puts them over a group of men, 1/3 each, to go out and to be ready for the battle against Absalom. And as he tells these men, this is the way I want you to arrange. This is the way the battle's going to go. He says, I'm going to go out with you myself. I myself. Now I read that and I thought back to about my freshman year in high school, when I wrote a sentence in my essay that said, I myself am going to do this, my teacher said, that's redundant. You don't say I myself. And then I saw this verse. I thought, well, if David could say it, you can argue with David. So I think I need to call my teacher and get my grade changed on that essay because he says, I'm going to do this myself. So he's using it as emphasis. He was a warrior that went into battle. He led people into battle, and he wanted to go with them to lead them. And the men all say, no, 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 no. So we'll go ahead and read the next verse. It says, but the Lord answered, you shall not, the people answered, you shall not go out. For if we flee away, they will not care about us. Nor if half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city. And so David represented hope for his people, his soldiers. And his soldiers were also men of war. They also knew battles. And they knew that if David was out there and Absalom and his men knew where David was, that they could kill half of David's army and they wouldn't stop. They could see that David's army was defeated and that they should ask for them to surrender, but they wouldn't accept that. They would have followed and fought until David died. And if David was to die, then or wherever David went, that's where the Absalom's army would pursue. And so they said, no, you be more help to us here in the city, under these fortified walls, giving us hope. And so David agrees to that. I think he's probably reluctantly, but he agrees to it. And so he goes by the gates. There's an inner gate and outer gate. And he goes there and he watches his troops leave. He watches them leave the city, and it's a military parade, and he's standing there as their king and as inspecting the army as it goes out to battle. Also giving them hope, just kind of reminding them what it is that they're fighting for. So it says in the 4th verse, then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. So he has this military parade, but before he leaves, he tells his generals and the captains, the commanders, be gentle with Absalom. In other words, don't kill him. And he calls him this young man, Absalom. Well, Absalom, I don't know exactly how old he is, but he's probably 40-ish. He'd already been married, or he had 3 sons and a daughter. He already lived, a number of years as an adult with his own house. But David's a father, and he sees Absalom as his son. And there's that desire that Absalom will change his mind. And so as they go out to battle, he really wants Absalom kept alive, given hope that Absalom will reconcile, that Absalom will humble himself before God's will and be a servant of David. And he retains this hope. And we think about the prodigal son, the father of the prodigal son. When the prodigal son returns, sees that the father sees him far off. And we get the idea that the father was always looking for his son to come home. His son had taken his inheritance and went out, to a far country and, lived his life. But his dad, every day he was out in the yard, every day out in the fields as he was working, he kept his eye in that direction, hoping his son would come back. Parents don't give up on their kids. There's always a hope that they will return. There's always a hope that they'll come back. And David never lost hope for Absalom. And again, people criticize him for that. Very harsh. And it's easy to say, this is what you should do. Doesn't matter what, if you guys want an opinion on what you should be doing in your life, just ask me. I'd be happy to give it. And I know plenty of you are happy to give me advice on what I need to do in my life. It's like, all right, thanks. And then you learn the rest of the story. You learn more about what's going on. And life is complicated. And so David picks the place of the battle. He hopes Absalom survives so that he can reconcile with him. He wants reconciliation. So as we continue, it says in the sixth verse, so the people went out into the field of battle against Israel. This is just one of those verses when it mentions they're fighting against Israel, not just Absalom, but the country. And the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than sword devoured. And so we have this battle that's set in the woods of Ephraim. So on this map we have of Israel, we have Jerusalem down here, and this is the path that David took. It goes up to Mahanaim, which is a fortified city, a city where Ishbosheth, Saul's son, set up his kingdom. So we know it was a very fortified city. And Absalom went further up the Jordan Valley and went to the Gilead. And then this is the battle. This forest of Ephraim is where they fought. Here's a zoomed in of the same map of that area. So this is where Absalom's men were, and they came down, I believe, towards Mahanaim for the battle. I don't think they wanted to fight in the forest of Ephraim. Um, David picked this place for the battle, and he went, and I think as Absalom's men were coming through the forest, that's where he had his men meet them. Absalom's men probably thought they were going to fight, surround the city, siege it, and try to destroy David, but David's men caught them in the forest itself. David wanted the battle away from Jerusalem. And as I've studied this more and more the last few months, it's clear to me that he didn't want the battle to be in Jerusalem because he didn't want the city destroyed. If there's a war, it would destroy the city. And Jerusalem was a safer place for David to stay because if you remember, it was belonged to the Jebusites before David. Joshua and all the generations after Joshua could not take that area from the Jebusites. They ruled it until finally David took it and it became part of Israel. It was a very fortified area just because it's a bluff and it is surrounded by valleys, kind of like a peninsula of valleys around it. And so that would have been a good place for David to stay. But David didn't want the city destroyed. He wanted to battle someplace else. And so I think that's why David left. And he picked this place for the battle. I think he knew the ground, he knew the what was going to happen. And so he's if he has to go to war, he's going to go to war. So it does say in 2 Samuel 15:14. So David said to all the servants who are with him at Jerusalem, this is when he's going to leave Jerusalem. It says, arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And so David even mentions this, that he doesn't want the battle to be in Jerusalem. He wants it to be someplace else. And the forest of Ephraim, it's described as was rough, rugged, and difficult area east of the Jordan River in the region of Gilead. It is known for its treacherous terrain, which includes pits, ravines, and thickets. It was so hazardous that it devoured more people than the sword, contributing significantly to Absalom's defeat. So this is something that I got online, just describing the area. But we think about forests, we think of trying to do battle in the Sierra Nevadas, but this was full of thickets and probably thorns on the thickets, hard brush that was hard to get through. And there were trees, and then there were pits. You just walk along, and there would be an open space that people fell into. And the Bible does say that more people were devoured by the forest than by the sword. So more of Absalom's army. There's 20,000 people killed that day. The soldiers of Absalom, 20,000. That's a lot of people. But when we go back and look at other battles, when David fought Ammonites or the Syrians, there was a battle between the Syrians and David and the Ammonites. The Ammonites had hired the Syrians to come down and fight. Thousands and thousands of people died that day. And David, victory, it's always lopsided. Seems every time you read about David going to battle, it's a lopsided victory. He's a force that cannot be reckoned with because God's with him. God has chosen him. And that's what Absalom's army finds that day, is that there's no defeating David. David was wise. He had picked a battle spot, and they went into the forest, and they're destroyed in that battle place. So in the ninth verse, we find that Absalom is riding alone. So apparently he got separated from his soldiers. Either he was separated or he rode ahead, whatever it was, he was alone. And he comes across a band of David's men. It says in the ninth verse, then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Now the certain man saw it and told Joab, and said, I saw Absalom hanging in the terebinth tree. So a terebinth tree is a lot like an oak tree. It's a big tree with lots of forks, lots of big, thick branches. And Absalom sees these men, so he marches or charges his mule through the brush and then gets his head caught in this tree. Now, all my life, I heard that Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. So I read New King James. I read the Old King James. I did not read the Old King James. I read a bunch of other ones. And it always says head. It doesn't say hair. So I'm thinking I got bad teaching when I was a kid. Because it's such a great story. His hair got caught in the head uh, because he had this beautiful lock of hair. It was just gorgeous, and it was his pride. Once a year, he cut it off, and it weighed like 5 pounds. So that's just a better story. John, you have it does say hair. All right. So I guess we got an argument there between translations. We'll have to go back and ask somebody that knows. So I like hair better, but the people when I grew up would never have read the NIV that taught me. So I don't know where they got. Maybe the Old King James says that. Do you have Old King James? It says head. Okay. All right. So I like the idea. Probably is well, the way I imagine it, and this is just me imagining it, is as he rode, he ducked, and the fork of a branch caught him and pulled him off. And the more he struggled, I mean, his hair probably got caught in all the little branches that were hanging off. And the more that he probably tried to move and pull himself out, the more stuck he got. And if his neck was caught, then there was a chance that if he pulled too hard, that he would drop and then it'd snap his neck. So he had nowhere to go. So anyway, so he's in this spot. The man sees him and does not kill him, does not try to help him, but he goes and tells Joab that Absalom is stuck in a tree. And so we'll go ahead and read in verse 11. It says, so Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? Why do you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life, for there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. And so this man that saw Absalom, he's pretty smart. He knows that he can't touch Absalom because of what the king said. And the king had told his generals, he had told the commanders, the word had spread, don't kill Absalom. And so Absalom's in this tree. He can't do anything. So he goes and gets Joab. And Joab's angry that he didn't just kill him on the spot, but left him there to be rescued by his own men. And so it says, 14th verse, then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. I like that. I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And the 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So we have Joab and his 10 armor bearers finding Absalom, and Joab throws 3 spears through him, through his heart, probably just through his chest. And the armor bearers hit him with their sword, and they kill him hanging in the tree. And so he dies in this tree. And a lesson I brought previously about Ahithophel, who rebelled against David, the Bible says he hung himself to kill himself. Absalom dies while hanging in a tree. The 2 biggest traitors to David both die by hanging in the tree. And I liken that to Judas Iscariot dying and hanging in a tree. He betrayed the Lord. So we have some similarities, a lot of similarities between David and uh, the Lord. Joab finds him and kills him. And in the 16th verse, he blows the trumpet. Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held the people back. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods, and laid very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. So we have the death of Absalom after what was probably 10 to 14 days of his rebellion. It was a very short-lived rebellion. It could have been as few as 4, but I would guess it's somewhere between 10 and 20 days of his rebellion. And he dies. He's killed hanging in a tree. And so Joab blows the trumpet, the sound of victory. So all his men know that the battle's over, that Absalom's been killed. And all of Absalom's men recognize the trumpet and know that Absalom's dead. And it says all of Israel fled. Again, the whole country was fighting with Absalom. And so they all fled and went back to their tents. The battle was over. Absalom had been destroyed. What David's men feared is that if David was killed, his people would scatter. Liken this to Christ. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin Council, all the high priest, everybody that's a leader in Israel, thought if they could destroy Jesus, his disciples would scatter. That would be an end of this Christian movement, the end of the followers of Jesus. And so that was one of the reasons they wanted Christ killed, one of the many. And when Christ was dead, his apostles didn't scatter, they gathered together, but they were very afraid. They didn't know what to do. But when the grave was empty, they were full of hope. And when they saw the Lord, their strength was restored, and they became better witnesses for the Lord after seeing him alive, after he had resurrected. And they went out and they never stopped. So that whole idea of kill the leader and the people scatter, that's what the Pharisees wanted, didn't work. But that's certainly what happens in Absalom's case. He dies and his people give up. It's like a sinner, we hope, comes to the point where they recognize that they are fighting God. They're not fighting their parents. They're not fighting the church. They're not fighting their pastor. They're not fighting their cousins. They're not fighting whoever. They're fighting the Lord. And that's when they give up and they surrender to God. And that seems to be where Israel is that Absalom is dead. They go back home. There's no, there's Massa, who's Absalom's cousin, is the general. He could have easily stepped in and been the new king, at least won the victory or tried to, and then they would have elected a new king. But Absalom died, and all their hope was taken away. They just go home. There's no more battle. I think they realize that God is with David because of the great slaughter. And we don't read about any of David's men dying. I don't know that I can't say that none did, but the Bible doesn't say anything about any of them dying. So we have Absalom has died, and they throw him into a pit and they cover him with a heap of stones. I looked at some commentary on this, and everybody that I read likened this to Achan. Remember who Achan is? Back in the days of Joshua. They went to the city of Ai, and the Lord said, destroy it, but everything you find here belongs to me. And Achan took some of the gold and hid it in his tent. And so it was found out, and eventually he was stoned, his family was stoned, and they piled a big stone of rocks on him. And so there's a symbolic thing by this bearing of the rocks, is that this curse of death that Absalom deserved. He deserved to be stoned to death for his treason, but this rocks was kind of a monument now to Absalom. These large rocks put upon him so that he was covered in stones. And so we have Absalom has died. It says in the 18th verse, this is a really interesting verse to me. 18th verse, now Absalom in his lifetime had set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. So Absalom built a monument to himself. Absalom was a very proud man. He loved himself a lot because he was perfect. He was good looking. He was strong. He had this hair, all these things that we hear about Absalom. So he built a monument to himself. And he built it because he had no sons. Well, you go back about 3 verses, and it says Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter. He named his daughter Tamar after his sister. Absalom had 3 sons, but then he built a monument because he doesn't have sons. So apparently, at some point when Absalom was in Geshur, or Absalom was away, there was a tragedy that came on Absalom's family, and his sons all died. So this monument, he is full of pride. But he's also, at this point, a grieving father because he doesn't have any heir. His kids have been killed. So if we know more about Absalom, it's like you can't justify what he did, but he becomes more of a sympathetic person. He becomes real to us. He's a grieving father. So I think that just added to his craziness. And so his insanity doesn't justify it, doesn't make what he did right in any way. But when we see somebody that errs, that falls back from the Lord, there's a lot going on. It's not a simple, they should just be in church. There's a lot of things that they have to reconcile with and deal with. And that's certainly what was going on in Absalom. And unfortunately, he took the wrong path. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Please do me a favor and like the video, share it with someone who will enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel. God bless.